Always just dancing and with the intro music. I'm so glad people don't see me. Hello, everyone. Today's session on Aucademy, I am joined by Melissa Simmonds. So I'm going to take the banner off just so you can see our names. I am Dr. Chloe Farahar, and today we are covering privilege in the autism community. I'm also going to ask to clarify, are we talking about the autism community or the autistic community or both? But we can clarify that in a bit. So I did wonder that, because I think actually there's probably the issue everywhere, but I wondered what exactly we might be talking about today. So as a physical description for people, I am a white person with a shaved head, giant glasses, and I'm wearing one of my favourite jumpers, which probably you all think I never change, but I do. I just like to wear this one, which is my current mood potato, with a really sort of laying down, sad looking potato. And I'm joined by Melissa Simmonds. If you're okay to do a description.
Yeah, so I'm a woman. I am a black woman. I have dreadlocks. I have one of those headphones with the little speaker thing or microphone so I can speak in it. And I've got on a yellow smock from Egypt. So it's got Egyptian hieroglyphics and pictures on. And my camera's very, very grainy because my daughter broke it. So
oh no,
there you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we have had Melissa on before talking about attention differences. So you're welcome to go and view that one again if you want a little bit more detail about who Melissa is, but we still like to ask, so who are you and what is or are your dedicated interests?
So I am Melissa Simmonds. I am a born and bred Yorkshire lass. I was born in Sheffield. Both my parents originate from Jamaica, and they both came to this country when they were little. So I think they're about around 6 or 8 years old, something like that. I live in Sheffield. I am an autism coordinator in Sheffield, an adult autism coordinator. I'm a mummy first and foremost to 2 children, and my area of interest is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And even when I say the words, I can't help but smile, because we've just come out of lockdown, and well, we're semi out of lockdown, and it means I've had the opportunity to go to the cinema and watch movies again. And the first movie I got to watch was Black Widow, Marvel movie, and I was close to tears. And I'm not particularly a fan of Black Widow, but to be sat again in a cinema, it was really overwhelming. Just the size of the screen and the noise, and it was amazing because it had been like a year and a half. And so I've been able to go to the cinema several times. I've been able to go and see Shang-Chi, which came out, and then Eternals came out a couple of weeks ago. So I feel really, really spoilt this year. And then having the Disney Plus channel as well, and being able to see all those series, it's been pleasure overload when it comes to Marvel for me this year.
It's fantastic when we do this, because some people will talk about what they do and they'll say that really briefly, but then obviously the bit about the actual dedicated interests, that's what lights us up, right? Sometimes our what we do, and as in if we are able to earn a living via going to work, etc. Sometimes those things overlap, but not necessarily always. And I am going to try and remind myself and Melissa to get Melissa to do a podcast. Exactly. I just saw Ben. I was thinking about this. So Ben is very big on Marvel. And so there is a Marvel channel within our Discord server. And he's literally put a comment just saying, did someone say Marvel?
Oh,
I think you would have so much to talk about, the pair of you. He's got so much, memorabilia and things in his room, because we all see him on like the camera. But we're not going to get sucked into Marvel today. I'm sad. I'm sorry for Ben as well.
Boo.
Well, we can definitely cover it in detail, because maybe Ben, you would like to do that as well. We could always have it as like a bigger session. And so very briefly, because like I said, we did cover lots of things in the other session that we did with you previously, but when did you discover you were autistic?
I discovered I was autistic, I think it was about 6 years ago now. well, that's when I got my diagnosis. I guess I discovered I was autistic about 8 or 9 years ago, because I attended a weekly charity organisation called ACT, which is Asperger's Children and Carers Together. And I used to take my son there because he's autistic, and he got diagnosed at 4. And that's the first time I actually met other autistic children and parents. And I started to realise that girls could be autistic as well, because my daughter's very different to my son, and so it presented very differently. And the more I got to know the families, and the more I got to know the little girls there that were autistic, I started to identify it in my daughter. And then there's autistic parents there as well, and them talking about their difficulties growing up and what they struggle with, I started to identify it in myself. So I always thank ACT for just giving me that space to go to every week for something for my child. But in doing that, the entire family was able to get diagnosed. And so our quality of life has improved because of ACT.
Fantastic stuff. So obviously because of the topic, but I'm thinking about your actual discovery journey as well, for your family. So the topic today, largely we're talking about the prejudice in the autism community towards Black people and people of colour. I'm going to come back because I've got so many thoughts. I'm so interested and want to learn about this topic in depth. So actually, I'm going to come back to what I said originally, which is, are we clarifying? Are we talking about all of anyone who's related in any capacity to autistic experience, whether they're autistic or not? So are we talking about the autism community, which is largely comprised of non-autistic people, maybe like researchers and families who consider themselves neurotypical? Are we talking about the autistic community, which is obviously comprised of only autistics, or are we just talking about both? We're talking about anything in relation to autistic experience?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, it's both.
Just wanted to clarify. Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you have somewhere you would like to start with this discussion? Because I was obviously, I think part of what we will end up discussing is, for instance, like you said, being autistic can present differently when we're female presenting, but is there for your family that added you were also a Black family, and that was also a reason for being missed until much later, for instance, for yourself at least?
I can't say that's why I was missed. So I'll always be really, really honest with people. As an individual, I'm outspoken when I need to be. So I can't say me as an individual, I was missed because of the colour of my skin. But what I can say is it is very common. And so if you think about the day-to-day racism and prejudice and unconditional bias that Black people face, it means then that the environments that adults and both children who are Black are in, the times where, say, a teacher, for instance, or a doctor may identify or start thinking, oh, maybe this is autism, because of the prejudice and the microaggressions that we face in the UK, often those professionals don't think about autism as the first thing. They will go to behavioural problems, or they will think, well, it's something at home or it's their culture, which means then that child is missed at those key points. And so that child goes on to struggle. And so that happens a lot in the community.
And obviously what we're talking about is that we know that, largely speaking, not all, but the majority of autistic people do struggle. But obviously the main point we're talking about today is that they're not struggling, however, because of the colour of their skin and experiencing prejudice and racism. And obviously I can't go into details, but I mentioned briefly before we jumped on that I've consulted with a number of young autistic people who are Black or people of colour, and it's a similar story where because I always ask for a background. So part of what I do when I consult, particularly when I'm only just meeting them, is I give a lot of structure, because obviously a lot of us like structure, unless they've got attention differences, and then I just let them go for it and I just take notes. And actually this is one of those times where I just took notes, but I was taking a bit of a background. I was trying to get an understanding of where they were in recognizing and discovering they were autistic. And sadly it was the case that they were isolated, they were in isolation, as in like isolation rooms and things like that during their school years, and that they were classed as having behavioural problems and issues, and they're autistic with attention differences. They also happen to be female presenting and a person of colour. And I said, you know, because we were having a discussion about the unfairness of actually how they've been treated by a number of professionals and schools and things. And some of it was very similar to how I hear, you know, about the experiences of lots of different autistic people of all, you know, ethnicities. But for them, there was very particular things that you don't hear of necessarily when the person is white. And yeah, it is. And without trying to sound patronising, because I'm just being honest, it's heartbreaking from my perspective, which is not the same as, obviously, I don't experience it. So I don't want to belittle or invalidate how it must actually feel for the individual themselves. I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, just to say, yeah, I'm becoming much more aware of this issue. And at some point today, Melissa, you're going to potentially, we can have that discussion about what can we do, what more can we do as white people in the autistic community that is not tokenistic, that's not just sharing a post about Black Lives Matter, for instance, and so on. But we'll come to that. So other key things that you were hoping where we could start, I guess, with this discussion?
I think one of the things, first and foremost, I have to kind of be honest about was last year during the whole George Floyd situation, a lot of us as Black autistic people and Asian autistics, so Black and brown people who identified as being autistic, we really struggled because obviously there was a lot of articles going around, there was lots of arguments online and things, and like any other autistic person, actually, when we become overwhelmed in the neurotypical world, we retreat and try and find a safe space to be in, and that's often the to be amongst other autistic people, be it face to face or online. And it was during a lockdown, so we were online, and we were finding that the normal environments and the normal Facebook pages and social media things where we would retreat to be amongst other autistic individuals, we didn't feel safe there either. And it's because there seemed to be a disconnect about what was happening. So we were hearing lots of autistic people trying to argue that they also experience oppression, and they also experience hate crimes because they're autistic. And it was really heartbreaking for us as Black autistic people, because even within the autism community, we didn't feel welcome then. That kind of, for us then, we started to realize that actually this isn't a safe environment for us either. There was lots of arguments when we were trying to talk about things like white privilege, and when we were talking about Black Lives Matter, and there was such a disconnect. And some autistic people would argue with us, and they'd say, well, you know, they're autistic, and we, you know, there's things we don't understand because we're autistic. But for us as Black autistic individuals, it was really hard for us because we didn't have the capacity, the physical or mental or emotional capacity to educate anybody, because we'd just seen somebody being killed on camera. It'd been shared everywhere. There was, you know, protests everywhere. We saw statues being pulled down, and we saw people being angry about that. And, you know, people started to kind of look at in their families and realize racism's happening, they started to talk about colonialism and everything like that. But then we found that as Black people expected us to start educating them about stuff, and we were absolutely exhausted and just thought, we're not welcome here either. And I think until then a lot of us felt we were, and we realized that just like in the neurotypical world where you have autistic people, we started to realize that, just because you're autistic, it doesn't mean that you can't be racist as well, and you can't be ignorant to what's going on around you. And so it was a wake-up call for us. So I have to be really honest about that. And I don't know if you have questions about that.
No questions at all. I completely, I just want to listen mostly, and try to understand. I think what some of those autistic people, saying that by being autistic they can't understand, I think that's really unfair to all autistic people, because actually a large number of us, and I'm not going to centre anyone in particular, I'm not going to centre myself in this conversation, but a large number of us as autistic people can be very empathetic, and hyper empathetic. I think that's kind of unfair to all autistic people to hide behind being autistic, as opposed to just acknowledging their privilege and their racism, and things like that. So I think that was a very unfair thing to do to autistic people in general, but absolutely abhorrent to do to Black autistic people, to hide behind being autistic. To be honest, lots of thoughts on that, but I'm being very conscious not to centre my experiences of last year, because they're not at this point in time relevant. I think it was me and you that I've had a small number of conversations around this with people who wanted to educate, so volunteered to educate me, because I was conscious of not expecting emotional or cognitive labour from Black people last year, for instance. So that also frustrates me. I've seen that quite often. I think we did have this conversation, whether that was on or offline, I can't remember now. But can you talk to that maybe? So again, I'm not going to centre myself just because I did something that different, but let's just assume that the majority of people, particularly if they are white, in those instances, they want to understand what should they be doing. And obviously what we are saying is they shouldn't be expecting and demanding emotional labour from Black people, for instance, or people of colour, to be educated. So if it's okay to discuss that, what could or should we be doing?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it's not my job as a Black person to educate everybody on the lives of Black people, because I am an individual first and foremost, even though I am Black. Also, we received a lot of private messages on our social media, so Facebook, Twitter, things like that, Instagram, people apologizing to us and explaining that they're not racist. So then it's almost like we have to then reassure them that we don't think that of them as individuals, which is incredibly tiring. They'd come and ask advice about, what books should we read? And actually a lot of people are just trying to live their lives as Black people. We don't, we're not born with this brain or a file in our heads where we've got this information at hand. So the same research that I have to do as a Black individual to find stuff out is the same research that a white person has to do. You go on social media, and I think I did have the conversation with you and say, I do appreciate that social media, it gives you you do get a lot of misinformation. Myself and a conservative supporter who's Black will look at the world differently. There's been some Black people who I've seen who've said, England's not very racist. It's not as racist as it used to be. And so I do understand that depending on the Black person you listen to, you're going to get different information. And so it's your job as an individual, just like it's my job as an individual, to be thorough in your research, you know, and that's what I have to do. Even when I was at university and doing assignments on the Black perspectives of autism, there was nothing in the UK that I could read about. I had to go further afield and look for things abroad. And so when you're not getting the answers and when you're not getting the information, you have to dig deeper. And that's your job as an individual on this planet, regardless of colour, is to dig deeper and get information and see what sits right with you. What you know, when you're reading something, when you think about the misinformation with the vaccines, there'll be stuff you read and you look at it and you're like, that doesn't sound right. And actually that website, that's not like a reliable link. And it's the same kind of thing, you know, that you need to do. And I always ask people, why don't you have Black friends? You know, and some people will say where I grew up, there wasn't any Black people. And I appreciate that, but as an adult, why don't you know Black people? I know people of every ethnicity or most ethnicities, religion, sexuality. So, you know, why don't you? And I don't mean you, Chloe. I mean, why
I
doesn't
don't
the
have loads of friends.
individual?
I have like 3 friends, but absolutely, I could do with more diversity of friends. So I'm not going to fall back to that I'm autistic, I only have 3 friends. But I am going to, you know, go to the fact that yes, I do need more and wider friends of, like, say, all different backgrounds. I want to, because a number of people have asked about talking a little bit more on this idea of emotional and cognitive labour and what that really might mean. So obviously we've got lots of different types of learners on our comment section, and I want to come back to, because we see this across lots of different oppressed groups, and I cannot ever understand what it means to be a Black person. So I'm trying to be as careful as possible not to centre myself, and I know I've said that already, but in the sense of I'm also trying desperately, like some of us as autistic people do, to think of instances to empathise as closely as I possibly can. But obviously if I'm doing something wrong, I know Melissa is going to tell me off, and we've had this conversation because that's absolutely valid and acceptable. So I'm coming back to the point of, like I said, people, for instance, you know, saying, like, apologising to Black people in your inboxes, in your private messages and things, and saying so sorry and things like this, and that happens in other situations too, but obviously we're centering it here. And the issue with that is, it, like you say, it takes it back out, or it puts it back onto you as the Black person to forgive and to give energy and emotion to comforting the white person who feels bad. And actually what that white person has done is giving you extra emotional labour, and that's really not appropriate. And like I say, because I can't understand what that feels like, and actually I can't understand it in this other example that I'm going to give, but I had a conversation recently with somebody about when somebody gets misgendered or mispronounced, for instance, and the person who makes the mistake will say, I'm so sorry, or try to defend themselves because they're embarrassed or because they feel guilty. And we can definitely talk about, you know, white guilt and so on, because they feel guilty, etc. And we had a conversation about, in that instance at least, the appropriate thing would be, thank you for correcting me, I will do better, because then you're not expecting emotional labour from the person that you've just upset or offended, or, you know, whatever it might be. Oh no, I've lost my train of thought. There's so many trains of thought with this. So we've got a small number of people who've already jumped in and got some fantastic comments and things as well. I think this was quite interesting, which is Ellie saying, I also think we can be quite impatient on social media. I know that when Ellie's saying this, they don't mean themselves, they mean the grander we, because I know a number of people who won't necessarily put that emotional labour. I will avoid talking to people at all costs, let alone in an inbox. I will go and do the research for hours because I don't want to talk to somebody. But learning about and truly understanding this stuff takes a lot of time. And that's the thing. How can we possibly, as white people, come into your inbox and ask you to explain centuries of racism and prejudice? How can we possibly expect that? We can't, we shouldn't.
Well, people want a quick win. And so, you know, oh, well, I know that black person on Facebook. I've never met her in person, but we're Facebook friends. So I'll go in there and say, oh, God, I saw what happened. It's absolutely disgusting. I was just so saddened. I can't believe this is going on in the world. Are there any books you could recommend I read? And actually, in that given time, it's my job during that situation to be an emotional support to my children who know what's going on, can't believe it's happened, can't believe justice hasn't happened straight away, feel angry. And so it's my job at that time to be the best mum I can be and be of emotional support for them. And also kind of at the time as well, I was very, because I'm a mum first and foremost, and he was crying for his mum. And so as a mum, it broke my heart to think of a grown man crying for his mum who she had passed away already. And so then I'm thinking about my children, and I'm thinking about my son who's growing up, and you know, the fears I have for him in the real world, because he will first and foremost, before anybody looks at him as an autistic individual or sees what he's doing as stimming, first and foremost they're going to see him as a very tall black man. And so there's all that fear as well. So I'm working through a million things and I have no spoons to do it, and I'm absolutely exhausted, and I'm trying to, you know, hold down a job and homeschool. And then your inbox is getting filled with people saying, what can I read? And I'm not racist, you know, I've got lots of black friends. And so then you're using your energy to either ignore and not look in your inbox, or you're using your energy to feel really resentful and angry towards these people, or you're using your energy to be reassuring them that, oh, of course I don't think you're racist. And so everything was centered around the white individual instead of the white community wrapping their arms around us and looking after us. And that happens all the time.
And I'm really, because I was thinking as you were talking, and I was thinking, and so I like that phrase, and I'm glad that you said that as well. This idea of the white community at those sorts of times, which obviously it would be nice if they didn't happen, but you know, at those sorts of times, wrapping their arms around you and supporting you. And I wanted to ask, because what would or should that look like? Obviously, it shouldn't be saying sorry to you. It shouldn't be asking or trying to reassure you that the person isn't racist. So what would or could, you might not have an answer, so I don't expect you to have an answer for everything.
Yeah, I know.
But how can we do that effectively and appropriately?
It's weird because my best friend in the world is white, and I don't even know if we discussed what happened, because actually, as my friend, she was just there. You know, we just, and then my other friend who I'm really close to and who's white, she just texts and says, I fucking hate this world. And that was all she said. So it wasn't about, she didn't make it about her. She didn't talk about her children. I know she went out and bought some books for her kids to understand it better. And because my friend's very aware that she's got 2 sons, they're white, they're middle class, and she knows they'll grow up with that feeling of entitlement. And so it's her job as a mum to educate her sons on, this is how you're going to grow up, this is how the world's going to look, like you're entitled to stuff, but this is the reality. And so she's doing that, and she's always done that. And so that's what you do it as a family. You're educating your children, you're educating yourselves, and it's not, your education isn't centered around us as Black people and asking us questions. Does that make sense?
Also, yeah, exactly, and not centering it around, look, Black person that I vaguely know, this is what I've done or what I'm doing. You should just be doing it. Just doing it to be a good human being.
Or it's performative.
And not be performative. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's weird because where I work, they bought loads of books about you know, like the Black perspective, a lot of relevant books, and they just left them on the desk. They made this like mini library, so they printed off a bit of paper, so take what book you want and read it, and that's how they did it. They didn't come to us and say, oh my God, what should we do? You know, the people who we work for, they've created a group, and it's a safe space for Black and brown members of staff. And so every month now, as staff, for 2 hours, we have a Zoom talk about just whatever we want to talk about, and it's just us as Black members of staff, and we're given that time to do that. And so I think it's about giving us the space to just live without asking us a million questions. But then I also empathize and understand that we want to learn. I want to understand anti-Semitism. I want to understand it because I don't want to mess up. And so it means that actually I need to make sure that I'm following and learning from Jewish people and people who understand it better than me. I'm not going to private message Jewish people to say, what should I read? You know, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to follow people. I'm going to see what they talk about. I'm also aware that there are some conservative Jews, and there are more. You have like the liberal you know, you've got various belief systems within that community, and so the activism in me struggles to listen to a Jewish person who is conservative to tell me about anti-Semitism. And it's not because what they're saying might be correct, but just for me, there'll be that thing in my mind thinking, well, are you saying this because of the party you follow? But I will still listen. I will still take things on board. And so it's your job to actually listen to as many people as possible and chew over it. And then I think start to just, I don't know, build on it. There isn't a right way to do this, but I'm trying.
Yeah, but listening to you, I'm thinking as well about how there's a big difference from expecting every single Black person that you come into contact with, or gay person that you come into contact with, it's, you know, of any minority that experiences prejudice. It's one thing to expect every single one of them to educate you on the spot because you ask, versus there will be activists, advocates, and educators who are doing that, you know, actively, explicitly. So not to say, obviously, it's still about being critical. Exactly what you just said. It's still being critical. What are they saying, though? What are other voices saying about this topic? So being critical and thinking, and not just taking every single thing that you hear or read as, you know, fact, etc., etc. But I guess the point I'm making is that there are people that are giving their time, their energy, and their emotion actively, without you having to expect it. I say you, I mean me and other white people, for instance, without expecting it of every single person we come into contact with. I think that's a big difference. And looking for those voices that are potentially actively. That kind of brings us on to talking a bit more, I guess, bringing this back more to talking about the autistic community, because obviously it's all interlinked. But what would you say are some of the key things that you would want us to pick apart and know about in terms of the issue of privilege in the autistic and autism community?
I think what autistic people have to understand is that there are people within the autistic community who are who have less privilege. I think initially we felt like, oh, we're all in this together. But then there has to be an understanding that within that, there are also people who are further marginalized. So a trans autistic person is they're going to experience further difficulties. A person who follows Islam who is autistic, and so it's like that. It's not, you don't just have the autistic experience and that is it. There are other things that are going to affect that autistic individual's life. And so for people like myself, I need people to understand that first and foremost, before anything else, when a person looks at me, they see I'm a Black person. My children, my husband, we are Black. And within the UK, a Black person's experience is different to a white person's experience. And there is further struggle and oppression and prejudices. And so white privilege exists in the neurotypical world, and white privilege also exists in the autism world. And even the concept of autism was created by white scholars looking at a cohort of white boys, hence why it's taken so much longer for there to even be an acknowledgement that autism exists in women. That's why it's taking so long for women to be diagnosed. And so there needs to be an understanding that actually being a Black individual, that has its own difficulties. So that's an added prejudice that we as autistic people face. And I've forgotten what your question is, because I do what you do. I start talking and then
go off on tangents, which is fine. It is, and you see it actually with lots of things, don't you? It is almost like that hierarchy of prejudice, which is, like you say, originally white males, or at least assigned male at birth, were more recognised as autistic people. Then we've seen it shift to now looking at largely white women, and but way behind that again is still the acknowledgement that there are Black autistic women, for instance. So I don't actually know what the statistics or the official statistics are. I don't know if you do, actually. I don't want to put you on the spot. No, that's fine. No, I didn't think that this would actually be something I'd consider, so I didn't do any research on that kind of statistics. But I am imagining that I would be correct in assuming that it goes large numbers of white boys or men diagnosed as autistic, a smaller number of women, white women or girls that are diagnosed as autistic, and then a tiny little number that are probably Black women. I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting as well to think about or find out about if Black boys are more or less likely to be recognised as autistic.
They're more likely than Black girls and women. And it just follows the natural line of equality. If you think about the suffragettes, and they had to fight for the rights of women, and so men were considered the pinnacle, and then you had the women, and it's the same thing within the Black community, where things were initially centered around men. I think also just because of how it presents in women, when you think about a Black autistic boy, what a lot of times what the schools are seeing is perhaps what they consider to be bad behavior and aggression. And so even when a Black child is presenting as autistic, those microaggressions in the teacher or in the teaching staff look at behavioral problems, or there's problems at home. And so a diagnosis isn't sought, or they're misdiagnosed.
And this whole thing of behavioural problems, etc., should just really just get scrapped, because it doesn't mean anything for anybody. It's a meaningless phrase, because nothing is just this behavioural thing. But like you say, it is the case that if you've got a white boy, potentially a white girl, who is more, doing a similar behaviour of some description to a Black girl or a Black boy, and not even then going into the issue with, well, what about non-binary people and trans people? That's going to be another intersectional issue. So I'd be quite interested. Again, I doubt that there's much, if any, literature on how many Black trans autistic people get recognised and diagnosed. That would that added intersectionality. And I've lost my train of thought again. Oh no. No, I've lost it. It's gone. It might come back. But yes, this focus on behaviour just completely overshadows everything, and it's meaningless. It's a meaningless phrase. Nothing is just behaviour. I mean, we did, and I'm not going to, because when we did a session, I think it was earlier this year, which is about the issue with media reporting of criminal or violent criminal activities by suspected or autistic people. And again, you see the same thing. If it's a white autistic person, and particularly male, they are blamed, their criminal and violent activity is blamed on being autistic. If
Absolutely.
they are a Black autistic person, then they're just violent or aggressive or a terrorist and things. And you can, so you definitely see, I mean, actually none of those things should be of focus. Per se, it shouldn't be the autistic experience, because being autistic doesn't equate to criminality, and certainly neither does being Black. But those things end up being the focus, as opposed to what else was going on for those people.
Yeah,
that they, and it's such a small number anyway.
but that's why
it's those narratives.
It's that's why I've welcomed, I mean, I've not read it thoroughly, the new autism strategy, and I know priority 6 is looking at the justice system, and I do welcome that, because actually a lot of, when you think about a lot of the Black boys in particular are missed, and they're sent down a different path. So you're looking at suspensions and exclusions, and then there's the whole school to prison pipeline. So you've got that child who doesn't get to finish their education, or may end up being groomed into like criminality, and then they end up in prison. And so I think I'm particularly, I mean, I'm interested in all the priority areas, but for me as a Black individual, looking at the priority 6, I'm interested in that one, to see what the government is going to do in acknowledging that a lot of these Black boys in prison have been missed from diagnosis, and not just autism, but other diagnoses that actually they should have gotten, and should have gotten the support for.
Attention differences. So what would be classed as ADHD, there are quite high rates of people with ADHD in the prison system. And again, as far as I'm aware, again, more likely to be Black or people of colour with attention differences. And like I say, they've been missed, they've not been supported, and it sometimes is very, what would you class it as? Not minimal criminal activity, that's not what I mean, like misdemeanours and things like that, and they end up in the prison system.
Yeah.
Somebody, fantastic, Nikki Duncan, there was a comment that was actually quite interesting here. So even cultural stereotypes mislead people. So the geek that plays Warhammer. So I'm going to take a guess here at Nikki that we're thinking of a white geek potentially that plays Warhammer, for instance, versus maybe a black person whose intense focus is grime music. So again, getting missed because of that. I mean,
if that person was interested in listening to classical music, you know, the perception would be very, very different of that boy. But something like grime and rap, then, you know, they're perceived as criminals before that's even entered their heads, you know. So yeah, that is a really good comment, Nikki.
And I really, you know, sometimes you see things just because you're scrolling really quickly through a news feed, like social media feed or like Instagram feed or whatever it was. And I so wish I'd grabbed, I share and pin so many things to come back to, and I forgot to pin it because I was just scrolling through. And it was somebody, I think they're in America, but they were talking about and I hope I'm not misgendering them because I only saw the post really briefly, but they were talking about being a black woman and how they're stims. So for those who aren't aware, stims for us in the community are self-stimulatory behaviours, which always sounds rude, but basically all the sort of movements and sounds and things that we do to regulate. So some of us, you know, tap fingers or hum or rock and so on and so forth. So just in case people don't know what that term is. And this person, it was just a quick post and it just said about the sorts of stims that we might miss. And I think we brought this up last time as well, or when we had a private chat, which is that they were describing their stims were like playing with their locks and like tapping their really long acrylics and things like this, and that those would get missed as autistic stims. And just, I don't actually know if they were talking about them being missed as autistic stims, actually. I think they were just discussing the difference in stims, and which I really wish I'd grabbed it because I actually would have liked to invite them on and have a bigger discussion about that, because I think it would have been really interesting just to see cultural and ethnicity or just differences in things like stimming.
Well, within the Black community, there isn't a vast understanding of what autism is, and I don't blame the community for that. You know, I'm a born and bred Yorkshire lass, and so I'm immersed in the community of Sheffield, and so I only know what I know, and so it's the same for any other Black individual. If they're in a society where they feel uninvited or unwelcome, you're not. Even when I think about the diagnostic tools that are used or the language that's used when they're asking parents questions, if our language or our understanding of language is slightly different because English isn't our second language, English isn't our first language, then that's a problem. If our mannerisms are different and we act a certain way because of our culture and the school doesn't pick up on it, then that's a problem. So actually, it's the job of the wider community to ensure that they understand our culture better, if that makes any sense.
And having much more culturally, I can't say that word, anyway, representative sort of indicators of what autistic experience might potentially be like.
Yeah.
I did a session with Monique Crane, who's lived in different cultures and countries, and we had a discussion, and I was describing a colleague of mine who's at another university now, and they're Greek. And me and this colleague have had a conversation before because I get on with them. I can communicate well with them and I enjoy their communication and company. And so we've had a conversation about, is she autistic or is she just Greek? Because the cultural differences in the mannerisms and things like this. So I can't decide if that just means I'd really enjoy living in Greece because of the cultural differences are much more autistic friendly to some extent, maybe, like in terms of communication and things. But yeah, so that I just found really interesting too. And obviously, because I'm not trying to expect you to represent all Black people ever, because that would be ridiculous, because everyone is from so many different backgrounds and so on. But for you, in your community, in your family, I guess, how is autism understood, or how, because obviously for yourself as a family, it was difficult to recognize that you're autistic until a certain point. But if that's a difficult question and you can't answer it, and I've asked it incorrectly.
No. As a family of 4 in our home, we're very laid back now, and because I've gone to university and learnt about it, and because my children were diagnosed my son was diagnosed at 4, my daughter at 6, and even now I feel so much guilt, because I feel like, gosh, 6 years of her life without, getting the diagnosis. And even though I know that is relatively young for a girl, but as a mum, I have that guilt. And so my kids, I think, because we changed so much to accommodate my son's difficulties, then it was easier for my daughter to grow up in the home, because we started to talk differently, we acted differently, we had subtitles on the TV because my son found that more comfortable. And so we were changing our lifestyle, and so it meant my daughter could fit in better without us having to change greatly. I think as a house as a whole, I think we respect one another's difficulties. I try to support my kids. I get it wrong all the time because I'm just a person as well, and I have sensory overload and I struggle with things as well. But I think as a household, we're pretty good. I have my mum, who's our biggest supporter. I'm really, really fortunate with the mum I have. I think with my wider family, there are some people who understand and some don't. And at first, I didn't tell people that my son was autistic in the family, because I was really worried about what they were going to say. And then when my daughter got a diagnosis, I was determined not to tell people, because she was so different. So my son is very placid, very laid back. My daughter is like a whirlwind. And so with my daughter, it looks more like just bad parenting, her behavior, compared to my son, who he's very compliant. He speaks the Queen's English. He's just so lovely. And then my daughter is so militant and opinionated and argumentative, much like her mum. And so I thought, I can't tell people she's autistic, because people are going to say she isn't autistic, you're just not parenting her properly. And then when I got my diagnosis, I thought, I can't tell people because they're not going to believe that I'm autistic. They're going to think we're just one of those families that have, we're hypochondriacs and we've found something that fits our narrative and we've made it up. But I realized that in order for me to, when the day I got my diagnosis and I came home crying, and one of my friends whose son's in class with my daughter, she sent home a bunch of roses. And so my kids come home with the roses and I'm crying. And so they thought I was dying or something. And I explained that I received a diagnosis for autism. And they said to me, they're like, well, why are you crying about that? And so for me, I then realized that I can't, although there's a lot of difficulties with having autism for me and for my children, and I'm not belittling people who have a lot of struggles, but I couldn't sit and be depressed about being autistic, because I needed my kids to know that there's nothing wrong with them. And so that's when I started to learn about it, and that's when I started to feel more comfortable in my skin. And so I'm in my 40s now, and I feel I feel the happiest I've ever been, and sometimes I'm skint, and sometimes I'm really depressed and really low, but actually I'm happier now than I've ever been. And that's partly to do with age and just feeling more comfortable, but having the diagnosis and understanding myself better has helped. And because I understand myself better, I have more confidence talking about it. And so I don't give a shit if my family believe me or not, or believe that my daughter is or not. I still at times feel nervous at family gatherings. I tend to talk faster and louder because of nerves. But I hope my kids are growing up feeling that their mum supported them. If nobody else did, their mum was there for them. So within my unit, I feel a lot of love and support, but the wider family, there's still I think some people do. I think with any family, you just have people who don't care. They don't care what you're struggling with. They don't want to listen. They don't want to know what your problems are. And I think that's the situation in my family. And I think there are some people who have rallied, and my friends have definitely rallied. But with the people who matter within my family have been there.
So a couple of things there. I was thinking, what you describe as well is interesting, because I guess that shows the commonality of when we recognise or discover we're autistic, which is something Annette and I are describing as the six stages of autistic discovery. And it feels like, I guess it makes sense. And so in the sense where you said that, you were kind of sad, and then you recognise that actually I need to be positive about being autistic for my children and things. But I guess what I'm trying to explain is that you still seem to have gone through the 6 stages, which most people do, and that feels really normal and natural for the majority of us. And so the 6 stages, it is loosely based on the 5 stages of grief, but nowhere near as sort of obviously depressing. But the first one being, denial. I'm not, I'm imposter syndrome. I'm not like my son. I'm not like third cousin twice removes child, that kind of thing. Anger, we all look back and have anger for how either that we got missed for so long, that people treated us badly based on our autistic nature. Some people get angry at the autism as if it's autism's fault, when really what they mean is they don't necessarily like themselves, and that's very sad. Whereas for you also then described basically what we class as the 6th bonus stage. So the 5 stages, you end up with acceptance. Yes, I am autistic. And then we say, but you might be getting, negative or mixed responses from when you disclose and things like that. And so some people aren't too sure how to confidently, which is what you've said now, being confident in your own skin, to not actually necessarily care per se. We still do, but feeling you're more confident in your autistic self, that it doesn't matter what the family, for instance, might think or say. So the 6th bonus stage is being, which not everybody has to do. As autistic people, we're allowed to be boring and bog standard and average, and not have to be all singing, all dancing. But then this is where we're going to get onto the real importance about something you really hammered home to me. I say that like you literally just made a comment, but it hammered it home for me personally, which is the choice to be an autistic advocate or activist. So our 6th stage, which is a bonus stage, is if people choose to, they can be, once they've learnt their autistic self and immerse themselves in the community and understand more than their own experience as an autistic person, etc., decide maybe to be an educator or an activist or an advocate. But the important thing, which we've had that conversation before, which is that for you as a Black autistic person or Black autistic woman as well, importantly, is that you didn't or don't have that choice. So if I decided tomorrow as a white autistic person to give up educating people on Aucademy, close it down, I'm not doing that. Don't worry, don't panic, people. You know, close it down and do something else. I don't know, giant African land snail breeding or something really random that has nothing to do with my autistic self. I have the privilege as a white person to do that and make another decision about, you know, what to do with my life as an autistic person. But yeah, you hammered home the point to me that you don't get that choice, and are quite, at the time, I don't know if you've changed your mind, but quite rightly angry at the fact that you don't just get to be autistic mum to your autistic children. So I don't know if you want to talk to that at all.
Because there are so few of us who have either come out as being autistic to people, or who've actually received the diagnosis and not been misdiagnosed with something else. So there'll be a lot of us that are just struggling and we don't realise we're autistic because it's been missed. So for me as an individual, I know autistic people around me who either suspect they're autistic or know they're autistic and don't share it at all. I don't have that privilege because there are so few of us. And so it's my job to ensure that people understand autism from the Black perspective, because I have autistic children that I want the environment to be safe for. I can't not go around and educate people because there isn't anybody else to pick up that slack if I'm not doing it. And I say all the time, I genuinely don't want to be doing this. I want to be watching the Disney Channel right now and maybe watching a Marvel movie again for the umpteenth time this week. So I want to be reading or, you know, writing my anthology or something like that. I don't want to be an activist. I want to be a mum that's just doing mundane day-to-day things and who can save my energy for things that I really enjoy instead of things that I have to talk about that sometimes makes me feel really sad and depressed and scared when I think about my children's futures, especially my son's. And so I don't have the privilege of saying, oh, I'm going to stop doing this, because actually if I stop doing it, there's nobody else to do it. And so I don't say that as a narcissist. I don't want to do this, but there isn't anybody out there doing it. And I was thinking earlier that it feels like every year or so the autism community finds another savior to put up on the pedestal. So we've had Greta Thunberg, we've had what's that woman from The Chase, we've had Chris Packham. We have a person who's a celebrity who comes out as autistic, and we put them on this pedestal and we praise them.
We've had two white women in what, the last 2 weeks? Two white women celebrities. Yeah.
Well, there you go. And so they're put on pedestals, and then we'll see pictures about them everywhere. We'll all be praising them. They're all wonderful, but you know, that means very little to me because I'm still having to drudge through all the crap of not being acknowledged or noticed and having to shout as loud as I can to try and make things different and better for my children's generation. And so I can't sit down from that because there isn't anybody to pick it up. Every area of expertise that you think about around autism, you know, you predominantly have white men at the helm, and then you have white women, but there's no Black individual who's given the space to talk about it. And so I have to be just really forceful, and I have to force myself into situations that's really uncomfortable for me.
And like you say, as white people in the autistic community, we're not making the spaces, the autistic spaces, safe. That was one of my very, very early points that I've made to come back to, because I didn't want to forget, and I wanted to ask, you know, obviously I wouldn't want you to necessarily publicise them here per se, but are there any safe Black and person of colour autistic spaces? You know, I would never set up an Aucademy Black and person of colour group. We have a number of groups. We've got an LGBTQIA group, but I don't run that because I don't necessarily class myself as queer, so I can't. It would be inappropriate for me to run it. You know, so for me, I think I mentioned this before as well. Actually, I would love to, if people want to use Aucademy to make a space like that, or just to have some support to set up a space. But are there those spaces? But I'm conscious as well that I want to have a platform for all autistic voices. So obviously I'm very happy that you're here and having a conversation with me. But I'm conscious it might not be safe for other Black autistic people or people of colour who are autistic.
I think now that I'm part of like more of a, although I've not been on social media at all in the last couple of months for my own mental health, because I was finding every time I watched the news, it was just so depressing. I was just going further and further down. And so I've kept off of everything. I don't know what the COVID rules are at the minute. I don't know what the government's doing at the minute because I've kept off of everything. And but you know, some people do send me emails from the Black autism community, and it feels like we're at the very, very beginning of more autistic Black adults starting to find their voice and starting to put things together like talks or seminars or workshops. And it's at the very, very beginning. But this is the UK I'm talking about, because they're much more advanced in America. I wouldn't say there's a better understanding of autism in America, but what I would say is there's more of a vocal Black community of autistic people in America.
Which is really interesting because, like you say, America, which I don't want to knock our American friends, but you know, and in the UK, you know, autistic experience still really isn't understood, but the prejudice towards autistic experience is very different in America. So it is interesting because you're right, I follow as many as I can find of actually all different voices, and obviously when I say voices, they don't have to be speaking, and the small number that I've been able to find of Black people or people of colour who are autistic do seem to be in the US, which is interesting.
Yeah, but more, you know, there's a sprinkling. There's like a handful of Black autistics in the UK who are kind of, they're at the very beginning, but they're starting to get their footing and want to speak up, they want to speak out. And I think that's really good. And it is about, I think it's about platforms and people sometimes giving their space at the table to say, listen, I'm for this next thing that's happening that I'm being invited to, I'm not going to take it. I would like you to invite this person to it. And it'll take things like that for stuff to start moving. But the autistic community have to take the lead in this and say, you know, they're one of us. They're Black, but they're Black and they're autistic. So because they're autistic, they're one of us, and we're going to do everything in our power to help them get their voices heard, so that we understand their plight, and that's what needs to be happening. And it's not just, you know, some people will host Black events for the wrong reason, and like you said, you know, you said Black people might not feel safe on your platform, so it might be something where you say, you know, I understand you won't feel safe on my platform, so how can I support you to make your own platform? You know,
which I'd actually be very, very happy to do. Because I know that I've got
it might be something like you mentoring somebody or talking somebody through how to start their own platform, so they feel like they're in control and they have that, instead of you saying, come to my platform.
Yeah.
and it's about that. It's about what are individuals willing to do, even if it makes them feel uncomfortable. What are you willing to do to support a member of the autistic family?
And I'm actually quite conscious, because we do have a small number of Black autistic people of colour who are autistic, in our Aucademy groups and things. So, and I want more for them, and it doesn't have to be from me per se, but certainly, I like this idea that we can do what we can. I can help somebody set up a website. I can help, all those kinds of things. And if we are, or if they feel that Aucademy is a safe space to do an initial session, so that we can signpost them over or share something from, I'd actually be really, really interested in doing that. Went off another tangent in my head. No, I've lost it again. This is a problem. There's also loads of comments, and I've got no Sai supporting me today, so I'm trying to manage several different things here.
Bless you.
Yes, basically making safer spaces for autistic people of colour and Black people. I definitely had another train of thought from what you initially started talking about. No, never mind. But I remember before we came on, you mentioned about almost like triple masking. So I don't know if you want to talk to that now.
There was a scholar in, gosh, I think he was born in 18 something another. Is a Black scholar in America called W.E.B. Du Bois, and he talks about the double veil. So he said a Black person has two faces, and they have the face and a mask of who they really are when they're at home amongst other Black people within the Black community. And then you have the face that you have and the mask that you have to put on when you're in white spaces. And white spaces are organizations and rules and structures that are set up that support the white community. So for us in the UK, if you think about the NHS, if you think about the government, these are all organizations that are predominantly white. And so when, for instance, when I was a civil service, I have to act a certain way amongst my white colleagues to please them, so that they don't see me as being an angry Black woman, so they don't see me as being aggressive. I have to wear my hair a certain way, else I get comments, and my nails have to look a certain way else. And so it's about you protecting yourself as a Black individual in those spaces, so you wear these masks. And so the thing I talk about is a triple mask, because as an autistic individual, I also have to act a certain way to keep myself safe within the autism community. So I can't be myself. And it's one of the things that I do always feel envious about, because I always hear autistic people say, when we're amongst other autistic people, we can just be who we are and we're just accepted. And actually, as a Black autistic person, my mannerisms and my personalities are still predominantly from my cultural background. And so I still have to act a certain way that isn't going to scare or be seen as being aggressive within the autistic community. So I have to act a certain way in the Black community because there's a lack of understanding of autism. So I can't just take off my mask and be who I am. So I have to act a certain way within the Black community. I have to act a certain way within the neurotypical community, and then I have to act a certain way within the white autistic community. And so it then leads me as an individual to have no concept of who I really am. And so for me, I've had mental health problems all my life, and I didn't understand I was autistic, so I didn't understand about sensory overload and fluorescent lighting and sounds and temperatures. None of that made sense. But certainly having to pretend I'm somebody who I'm not in every single environment leads me then as an individual to never feel safe in any environment. But also then when I am by myself, I don't know who I am. And I'm grateful that my kids actually, they're much happier than I was as a child. And hopefully they will be much healthier as they're growing up. I want my kids to lead happy, healthy lives, and hopefully because they have more self-awareness already, they won't have to struggle as much as I have, because I was diagnosed in my late 30s, and so it's only now I'm starting to get a concept of who I am. It's only now I can be really honest about the absolute passion I have for Marvel, and wear a t-shirt saying Marvel and wear my Mandalorian t-shirt. But sometimes I do get nervous because I think I've worn that. You know, people have seen me wearing this once already this week. I can't wear it a second time outside of the house. What are people going to think? So I still have that, but actually even buying the t-shirt and even talking about my love of Marvel and Star Wars on social media, I wouldn't have felt safe doing that before. And now, because I'm really honest about being autistic, I will talk about it in any environment and not feel, I still feel nervous sometimes, but I feel much happier now than I have before. And it's weird. I've not been in my office very long, and I started my job during lockdown. So but we all went out for a lunch recently, a lunch outside with staff members, and was walking back to the office, and because I'm in Sheffield, there's 2 universities, and this university student stopped with the microphone, and she's like, I'm just doing something for my dissertation. She says, can you tell me what you think the best movie ever made was? And my mind just started to spark, because I'm thinking, oh my god, what do I say? What do I say? So I started to talk about Marvel, and she was like, oh, thank you. And it obviously meant nothing to her. She just wanted the response. But then there was this random guy sat there, and he kind of disagreed with the movie that I liked, but he was like saying he thinks this Marvel movie's better. So then I was just stood on the road talking to this random person, both having masks on, talking about why we enjoyed the movie we enjoyed. And I wouldn't have been able to do that before. And the more I feel comfortable in my skin, the happier I am as an individual. And I want that for every autistic person, full stop. But I really want that for the Black autistic communities.
And I hope this doesn't feel patronising. I'm saying this because I like you, and I want that for you, that ability to light up as you just did, because you get the opportunity to talk about your dedicated interests. And I'm quite interested to know which film as well that you said. Are you prepared to let us know?
Oh yeah, Captain America: The Winter Soldier to me is the best Marvel movie, because it had everything, in my opinion. You know, I enjoyed that one. But yeah, I would love to be able to just get up and talk about what I love. And I know even in the neurotypical world, when it comes to, you know, you have to work or you have your career, a lot of times you have your hobby, so it's something separate. So I'm not saying, oh, I want to quit everything and just talk about what I love, but it just saddens me that I work all week, and then during lockdown I tried to give 2 talks a month about autism things. It was absolutely draining. But I needed to be doing it because, you know, George Floyd was killed. All of a sudden we started to realize, oh, maybe some police officers are racist, or maybe the government's racist. And so people were kind of, the white communities were like sponges. They were soaking up anything and everything they could find about the plight of Black people, of brown people. And so I couldn't just then sit back and be a mum and cradle my kids who were really angry about what was happening. I had to kind of put on my militant boots and get on my soapbox and be educating people as well. And I genuinely didn't want to do that. And I say all the time, I want to be in a space where I can just be a parent. That's my my wish for myself. Be a parent watching TV, and I'm happy.
And I'm quite conscious of how busy you are, because I think I mentioned, I think just in a message before, that I would love for you to be part of Aucademy, but I'm so conscious of how much you're doing already. So I guess that offer is still there.
Yeah,
but
I know the offer's there, and I'm trying to, because it's something I really want to do as well, but I'm trying to do this self-care thing that I fail at all the time. And I'm just learning to take the information in without saying yes to stuff, and kind of looking at my capacity. And it's, honest to God, it doesn't sit right with me, because every time I say no, or every time I say, well, I'll have to think about that, I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the Black community, because I feel like, oh God, I need to educate as many people as I can. And but then, you know, I also first and foremost need to be a mum. So I'm just telling you how my brain works and what I'm thinking
you absolutely
all the time.
don't have to explain, because we've had this conversation and I understand that. It's more, I want you to know that offer is open, and if in 6 months' time you suddenly have more, I say free time, who has free time?
I know, what is free time in the era of Zoom? Free time doesn't exist anymore.
There's no such thing as free. I literally work 7 days a week, and obviously we do things for different reasons, and obviously there's the point that I have that privilege I could give up tomorrow, so it's not the same at all, but some empathy, in the sense of that feeling of, well, if I don't do it, either nobody will do the thing, or the very wrong people will do the thing and make people's lives worse. So it's not for the same reasons, but I think I can empathize with that concern. So it's more the case of, there's that open offer, but also more importantly, I guess, is if you come across somebody who Aucademy could help in some capacity, again, that's a tangible thing that I can do, because I don't know what else at this point I could do. We're hoping to eventually Aucademy could be a proper thing. I say that all the time, because Aucademy, it's not a charity, we're not a CIC or anything like that, but I hope one day we are, because then I can employ so many fantastic autistic people, and so then there could be that option. You never know, Melissa, and then you could take over all these different spaces, because
you're so organized. I lack the ability to be organized to manage.
But that's why we would find autistic people who that is their skill, that is their thing that interests them, because then they're always she always sort of derogates herself and feels bad and says such negative things because she doesn't have my organisation abilities, but I don't have her creative and art abilities that she brings to a lot of the projects that we do and things like that. So that's what I like. I've gone from a complete. This is now us thinking about Autopia, which is where all of us as autistic people of all backgrounds could actually. I do like to daydream. Otherwise,
it's nice.
I don't think.
No, I have a vision. I have a vision for Sheffield, and it's that, you know, everyone my kids come into contact with has an understanding of autism. I want to ensure that, because obviously I have a daughter. She may grow up and want to have children, so I need to ensure that the maternity hospital understands autism. My son is, he may come into contact with the police. I need them to have an understanding of autism, and so that's my vision. So it's not the autism awareness of autism friendly thing that just happens on like the 2nd of April, and then that's it. But an actual city where people are welcome and embraced and supported to live their best life. And that's my vision. And I think if we didn't have those visions, then what the hell are we working towards?
But that is definitely okay. That is our plan. Then we are going to be this love. It doesn't have to. It might not still be called Aucademy. Who knows? But this big thing where, because we've got David Gray Hammond, who is desperately trying to advocate for people to understand and be able to support autistic people and people with attention differences with addiction. There's next to no literature or resources on this. So that's, his interest and area and what, he's dedicated to trying to support. So you see what I mean? So we just scoop all these fantastic people and try together to make that difference. We're ending hopefully on a positive, but this is
always.
what we need. I think I don't know if it'll work me interjecting it here, but I think I remembered what I wanted to say earlier on. I don't know why it came back to me, but it was about specifically and very importantly as well, going back to the whole point, which is about the issue of privilege, white privilege in the autistic community, where we are autistic people, not the non-autistic autism community. And the importance there, I've seen a few posts and they're very important because they say things about how, for instance, because like we said, Black people are not a just homogenous mass and community. There's so many different cultural backgrounds, etc., etc. And in some Black communities, autism really isn't discussed anywhere near the way that some of us, even on Aucademy, talk about autism. And in a lot of autistic spaces, using, person first language, so person with autism, would get a lot of, not abuse, that's not fair, because actually a lot of autistic people are just exhausted having to explain the same thing over and over again. But it is, and that's why with Aucademy, my ethos was always gentle educating, which is when I first met you, and you said that was your thing, which was wanting to gently educate, because sadly, obviously for different reasons, people don't listen if we don't gently educate, and then we don't get very far. My point being that in the autistic community as well, we have to recognise that certain groups, certain people will come into the community, which we want to scoop them, but they will come in with the language that we don't like, and all these kinds of things. And I think I saw a post, I really can't remember who it was from because I'm really bad with names and faces, but they were saying the same thing. They were a Black person who was doing a talk, and the poster had puzzle pieces, the wrong language, all this kind of thing, and people were attacking that. And the person, the Black speaker who knows the wider narrative, why we use identity first and things, said, you're focusing on the wrong thing. The fact that this talk is even happening in this particular community is important, and you're focusing on the wrong thing. And I thought that was really important as well, that we have to recognise that as white autistic people, we also can't police, or shouldn't be policing, the language, and just having that gentle education for people. I can't remember why, something you said made me think of that, about what we need to do to invite Black autistic people in and make them feel safe.
Yeah, and you're right about that. I've seen as well, I remember it was a couple of years ago, and there was this dad, and he'd created this space in America. He was a Black dad, and he'd created this space in America for his Black child and for other Black kids who were autistic. And he used the puzzle piece, and I cringe at the puzzle piece. I cringe at that language. But I understood, for him, he was at the very beginning of his journey, and he'd actually, as a Black man, gone out and found the funding and created something where Black families could come together to start supporting one another. And actually, instead of people praising him and saying, how can we support you, and then going in there and supporting him and then saying, well, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we no longer use the puzzle piece, and this is why, they just ripped his post to shreds. and he ended up coming off of social media, and it happens a lot. And we sometimes we're savage in the community. We're absolutely savage, and that has to change. And I understand the frustration, but as a Black person, I was really, really angry because he was trying his hardest with the tools he had, with the understanding that he had. And you know, the white autistic community, they're further on in this understanding of autism, just ripped it to shreds without any support, and
I
it's
yeah. So
horrible.
I think white autistic people of Aucademy, we need to make our spaces safer. And certainly on Aucademy, I think for me, I find it much easier, particularly with new autistic people, in the sense they're only new to understanding that they're autistic, for instance, or they're only new to understanding that there are actually more than one narratives around this thing called autism and things. And I think sometimes just modeling that behavior. So I will just keep referring to myself as an autistic person. I will, doing it in that way. And they might ask, why do you keep saying that? And then you can have that opportunity to have a discussion. Slightly different when I go into non-autistic spaces. There I will still gently educate, I think, but I have no patience, because I think actually it's a very different thing in those spaces. And again, that's the same sort of thing. I've been very frustrated before when I've corrected somebody because they were referring to me as a person with autism. And for me, that's not right. That is not what I am or who I am. So I corrected them politely and then moved on to my main point that I wanted to make. And that was an instance where I got, oh, I'm so sorry, so putting it back on me to be the one to forgive. And language is so hard to change, isn't it? And I was just like, it's much harder to hear it, actually, this kind of thing. So, that's different. If you're in a non-autistic space, be an activist and so on. But I think as white people, we need to be kind and gentle, because we want to find as many isolated or lonely or just whatever stage they're at autistic people, and they will all be coming from such different starting points. And we need to be safer for those people too. And if we are finding it as autistic people of any background, we're finding it difficult because we're fed up with having to hear the language that hurts us and things, we don't have to be part of that discussion with those people. We don't have, just scroll past, you don't have to give your emotional and cognitive labor there, or just have a link to the thing so that you're not using your time and your spoons and your energy and things. We need to be much safer. Were there any other key things you were hoping we were going to talk about?
Not that I can think of, because what I was saying is I always feel comfortable in this space, and I prefer, there's some talks I come to and I come with a PowerPoint and I just talk, but I prefer the conversation and the back and forth. So there may have been things that I wanted to speak about initially that I haven't, but I can't think of it. So it means it's not been burning in my brain thinking I must mention that. No,
it was more if there was any burning things that you were really hoping to cover. And I keep trying to promise Aucademy educator learners in the comment section that I will try and stick to an hour, but it never happens. But autistic people are far too interesting. I keep saying this. I keep saying this to the people I consult with, which is why I don't do too many consultations, because it takes a lot out of me, because I'm giving a lot to those people. But also, particularly with young autistic people, I think what's quite sad, I've gone off on a weird tangent, but what's quite sad with young autistic people is they apologise a lot for going over time or with me, when actually it's mine, space, and I'm got my boundaries and things like this. But I'm yet to consult with an autistic person, and I've actually consulted with a lot of people in the last sort of 14 months. I realised the other day when I was working out, taxes and stuff that I have to pay, all that kind of business, how many people I've actually consulted with. And I was just thinking, I can't think of any of them that weren't interesting. And so I reassure the young autistic people particularly, because they do worry so much, like so much, you know, of their self-esteem and things has been knocked. And so I always reassure them that if they'd been neurotypical, I would have ended it dead on the hour. Because they're so interesting. They're so interesting. As soon as you get them to talk about, you know, Marvel that they're really interested in, or whatever it might be, even if it's, I mean, I like Marvel actually, but if it's something I don't know about or I'm not overly interested in, it is lovely. It's just lovely to hear people talk about their dedicated interests.
I mean, my daughter is anime crazy at the minute, and I have no interest in that thing at all. And she will just follow me around the house talking about it. And I try my hardest to switch off, and I think, God, is this what, you know? I wasn't able to do that when I was younger, but I think, God, would I have been like this if I was given the space to be who I am, which is a positive, you know? But yeah, I do have to kind of switch my brain off and just walk around the house, and she just follows me talking about anime.
Actually, to be fair, there are times when, like, Louis' interest in, he's really interested, and he has been since about February this year, in, I can't even still explain it, and he must have tried to explain it to me multiple times since February, and I still just tune out, and I just can't, it just does not hold my attention. It's something to do with that there's a gaming company in America, and they were basically being driven into bankruptcy by the people who, like, stocks and shares people who, I really don't know how to explain this stuff because I don't listen properly. But he's been fascinated by it, and so every day he's looking at how they basically, the company was about to go bankrupt or just be driven into, you know, liquidation by the stocks and shares holder people. You can tell I don't know about this. And now they've got loads and loads of money because and they're going to be fine for years because people found out what the stocks and shares people were doing. So loads of people bought shares and wouldn't sell them and things. So Louis is just trying to explain this to me all the time, and I just tune out. I can't help it. It's just so boring. Yeah. Oh, it's GameStop, Bobby. So Bobby's just said GameStop.
Oh, right.
It's called GameStop, I think. But yeah, I can't. I just tune out. But most of the time, people talk about really interesting things. Okay, I feel like we covered lots of things. I'm hoping. I think that there are some things that I can definitely take away. That, again, I like more practical and tangible things. So I think there's a number of things that I can definitely take away, and we can do better on Aucademy. And hopefully people in the comment section as well. If you're a white person, we can definitely be doing better. So as always, we like to end on my favourite question, which is, what's currently your favourite stim? So I'm trying to remember, what was yours last time and has it changed?
What was it last time? It was probably watching Marvel. And I haven't watched enough Marvel recently, but I've been going to the cinema. What's my stim at the minute? My stim at the minute, I'm reading a lot, and I stopped reading years ago. I couldn't read a page. I'd have to read it like 5 or 6 times for it to sink in, and I stopped reading any fiction because it was just like, you know, reading factual books for university. And my daughter's gotten me onto an app called Wattpad because she downloaded Wattpad, and I was really worried what it was. And I was like, I demand to know what you're reading, because she was just always quiet and in a corner. I'm like, oh my God. And so I downloaded it to see what it was. And actually, they've got amazing fan fiction on there and amazing books. And so that's my stim at the minute. I'm reading again for the first time in, God, at least 20 years, if not longer. So that's my stim at the minute.
Fantastic stuff. I love it. I just like stealing people's stims as well. If people have got ones that I've never done before and things, I'm like, oh, can I find another one that will help me regulate in a particular setting that I've never thought about before. I love that. Talking of books, actually, in fiction, I'm reading sort of the latest, I guess, by an author that I quite like. They're called Becky Chambers, and I wonder if they're neurodivergent. And the books, they're not about neurodivergence. Typically, actually, their books have been about it's fiction and sci-fi and sort of aliens and things like this. But they just very naturally, or at least it seems to me, naturally weave in, for instance, non-binary characters of actually different species as well, and different like aliens and things like this. And it's just really enjoyable. So I'm just flagging that because we have, a number of LGBTQIA autistic people. We've got a group as well that's specifically for that group. But it's just really lovely because I think sometimes where representation, and this can go with every form of representation that's ever misrepresented, it's usually the mistake people make is where they specifically make it about the representation. Does that make sense?
It does.
When they don't make it about this character and this whole show is about autism, when they don't do that, when they make it just a show about whatever it might be, and they just happen to have a really well coded autistic character. I don't know if you can speak to that as well about, sadly, I can imagine there's not any Black autistic representation in the media necessarily, or not necessarily written specifically.
No, but what I can say is representation does matter. Going back again to Marvel, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier came on in March on the Disney Channel, and a lot of people kept saying that they're gay. And my own ignorance was like, why does it matter? Why are people so fixated on these two characters being gay and in a secret relationship? But then at the end of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, when Falcon became Captain America, I felt so much pride at this Black Captain America. And then in WandaVision, there was a new superhero, and she was a Black woman. And even in Loki, there were some really, really good, strong Black characters, Black women. And whenever I see superheroes who they show you what they would be like if they were Black, it's amazing. And me and my daughter are really into it. And so there was a lot of things written about Falcon and the Winter Soldier being gay, and it was really starting to get on my nerves. I'm thinking, this isn't about them being gay. We just want to read the book. We just want to watch the show. And it was everywhere on Twitter, and it was really irritating me. And then I found this Twitter feed, and it was the journal of Bucky, so the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and they're both writing their journals, and they're falling in love with each other. And I absolutely loved. Every morning I'd wake up, I'm like, oh, what's happened now? And the story was just so beautiful. And by the end of it, I understood why within the gay community, why it was important for them to have gay characters who were superheroes, because representation matters. And so even me as a person who's always talking about white privilege, I understand the privilege I have as being a heterosexual individual. I have that privilege, and I'm always fighting about representation, but couldn't comprehend why people wanted these characters to be gay. But actually, I get it. And it was just such a beautiful story of these two men falling in love and kind of living in the area where the Falcon's from, and how it's beautiful. And I've not been on social media recently, but I do look forward to going back and reading it and seeing where they've gotten to. So yeah, representation absolutely matters.
Good representation. This is, like I say, that this is the issue. We don't want more. There are this is the thing. There's so many white, cis, straight males who don't get recognized as autistic because they don't meet that very, very narrow stereotype, even though they're white, cis and straight and male. And so obviously representation matters for everybody, but it is exhausting to just keep having white, cis, straight, male representation where the show is specifically revolving around this idea of autism, and they're just getting it horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And that's why we tend to talk about characters. I think I did a session with David, I can't remember if it was the beginning of this year or if it was the end of last year, about the importance of media like TV and films and books and things for autistic people. But then we did talk about people who were coded as autistic, but didn't necessarily, it wasn't about that. It wasn't, you know, they were just included as if it's just normal to have friends who are autistic, because it is. And so we talked things about like Community. I don't know if you've seen Community, which I love. And I always used to say, and I think I watched Community before I recognised I was autistic, or I'm trying to think now when I might have watched it the first time. And I would always say, oh my God, I would be Abed's friend. Like I liked him as a person, as a character. I would argue actually the show is about Abed, really, like he's the central character.
Yeah. It's through his eyes. I agree with that.
But he's definitely autistic.
Yes.
And his character is just really lovely. But it's not, the show isn't about autism. And so I feel like those sorts of representation, that's important, as opposed to it being purely about this is autism, let's make a show about it, because they get it wrong. I don't know why they do, but they just seem to get it wrong. Anyway, definitely gone on.
I know what you mean.
I can't help it, it's just too interesting. So thank you everyone so much. I think I need to confirm our guest for next week, so we will let you know in the week, so it'll be a mystery, because usually I know by this point, I'm very organized, usually weeks in advance, but next week we just need to confirm who it's going to be, so you'll have a little surprise next week. Thank you everybody so much. Melissa, feel free to stay on, and we can have a little quick debrief after the credits and see how we feel. Thank you everybody, and we will see you next week.
Bye.